So our next speaker is Morgen A. Chalmiers. Morgen is a MD PhD candidate at the University of California, San Diego, pursuing a PhD in medical anthropology. Her research and clinical practice are informed by the paradigm of reproductive justice and a commitment to addressing health disparities through an intersectional framework. Her dissertation examines how structures of healthcare provision for refugee populations are intertwined with US imperialism in local and global settings. Organizing with healthcare workers for Palestine and Doctors Against Genocide has led her to critically examine the narrowly defined boundaries of physician advocacy and how these are expanded by healthcare workers organizing for political transformation, social justice, and an end to the US-backed genocide in Gaza. So Morgen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me today. I'll just share my screen. Okay. So over the last year, an unprecedented global movement has emerged in solidarity with the right of the Palestinian people to live freely and safely in their indigenous homeland. As the world has borne witness to the Israeli occupation's genocidal campaign against the people of Gaza, millions have been compelled by their horror and outrage to take action. In my talk today, I want to reflect on the forms that our actions in solidarity with Palestine have taken and invite us all to collectively strategize on how we can most effectively mobilize to impose a global arms embargo on the Zionist army and to act in solidarity with the Palestinian people to end the ongoing occupation of their indigenous homeland. Last spring, as students set up encampments on college campuses across the US, the overarching united goal was to push for institutional divestment, echoing demands that have been made by student groups across the country for years in response to the call for solidarity through boycott, divestment, and sanctions, a call that was originally made by Palestinian civil society and trade unions in 2005. Student calls for divestment echo strategies used in the decades-long global campaign to end human rights abuses and apartheid in South Africa that culminated in the 1980s. Since that time, the chain connecting university money to the companies making the weapons that are being used in Gaza today has become increasingly convoluted and difficult to trace. For example, the University of California has more than $175 billion of investments spread across various funds. The largest of these is the UC retirement plan, followed by the endowment. Each of the 10 UC campuses has a, quote, UC foundation for each individual campus, and each foundation manages on average several $billion worth of investments. Public universities like the UC are required to file updated reports with the SEC, or the Securities Exchange Commission, like a US federal agency, up to 4 times per year for all investments over which the UC regents have, quote unquote, discretionary control. This number varies every quarter, but it was most recently reported as 183 million. That is to say that less than 1% of the University of California's investments can be traced via the SEC database. To state the obvious, the lack of transparency on where university money is actually invested has meant that the demand to divest is necessarily preceded by the demand to disclose. In the decades that followed the movement to divest from South Africa, the management of investments has been increasingly outsourced to third-party intermediaries through index funds and mutual funds. Even investments and stocks that are filed directly with the SEC, or the Federal Security Exchange Commission, they're not always straightforward to track. Direct stock holdings in companies like Blue Owl or Berkshire Hathaway represent investments in multi-conglomerate corporations which respectively own and or invest in hundreds or even thousands of individual companies themselves. It's interesting, though, to compare this recent filing from May 2024 with one from August 2023, which shows the University of California's direct stock investments in 3 companies named as directly complicit in the Gaza genocide: Honeywell, General Electric, and ExxonMobil. The most conspicuous targets for divestment have silently disappeared from the list of holdings the UC is obligated to publicly disclose to the SEC. While the sudden disappearance of stocks that the UC had invested in for more than a decade is almost certainly a response to increased public scrutiny following the Gaza solidarity encampments, student organizers have always known that the holdings disclosed via the SEC represent only a tiny fraction of university investments. At a recent meeting of the University of California Regents on May 14th of this year, the Chief Investment Officer, Jagdeep Bakker, provided an aggregate summary of the UC investments that are named as complicit in the UC-wide demand to divest from all entities complicit in the ongoing genocide. These included direct investments as well as indirect investments made via index funds, mutual funds, and other third parties. They included $3.3 billion worth of investments in weapons manufacturers, and that's according to like the indexes of the stock themselves. So any stock where the index is classified as a weapons company was included in this count. Then $2.3 billion in investments that are either managed by BlackRock for the UC or invested directly as stocks in BlackRock. $8.6 billion in investments via Blackstone, and $3.2 billion in companies that are named as complicit in the ongoing occupation, either by the Who Profits or the AFSC, that's the American Friends Service Committee investigative databases. In total, these add up to $17.4 billion of university investments that are complicit in the occupation. We know that these investments are being made via the Retirement Pension Fund, the General Endowment, and the individual campus UC foundations. So the question that we as student organizers find ourselves asking now are, how do we most strategically pressure stakeholders at each individual fund to support divestment? For example, how might faculty collectively leverage their position as pension holders in the retirement fund to apply pressure here specifically? Decisions about each individual UC Foundation's investments are made by a select group of individuals from the Board of Trustees. For some campuses, it may make sense to direct much of our energy towards pressuring the local entities that are most accountable to the campus community directly. In other contexts where, for example, the prior vice president and chief technology officer of Honeywell itself holds a position on the Board of Trustees of the local UC Foundation, it may be more strategic to direct our energy towards other forms of organizing on campus, such as the academic boycott. American universities have a long and sordid history of collaboration with the US military through partnerships seeking to develop or improve upon the technologies of war that are used in service of US imperial projects across the globe. The GBU-39 small diameter bomb, for example, was developed in the early 2000s on the University of California campus through a partnership between the UC Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, the US Department of Defense, and Boeing. The GBU-39 was first used during the American occupation of Iraq, but became infamous even in the mainstream media over this most recent summer as one of the weapons preferred by the Israeli occupation forces in what they refer to as precision airstrikes on schools, mosques, and shelters for the displaced. The GBU-39 has killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians in Gaza since the genocide began, has been used to target schools in Deir al-Balah and Gaza City, and ignited the horrific fire in the Rafah tent massacre. While the GBU-39 itself was developed through a research partnership with Boeing, the inertial measurement unit that is critical to the navigation system of the guided munition itself is manufactured by Honeywell. You can see like the red box there on the screen. That's how they managed to identify it. The reason there was so much like press coverage of this specific bomb was because the way that it detonates, it leaves behind a lot of identifying information. So people were actually tracing the weapons back to the actual factories where they were made in the US. So this is the inertial measurement unit that's made by Honeywell. At the University of California, Honeywell has provided $79 million worth of research funding for research that's funded either directly by Honeywell or via its subsidiary Sandia LLC. Several of these projects sought to refine the function of gyroscopes similar to those used in the GBU-39 navigation system. While the development of the GBU-39 is a particularly egregious, horrifying illustration of the depths of our institutional complicity in the ongoing genocide, specifically through research partnerships, it is far from exceptional. For decades now, academics have mapped, critiqued, and denounced the ways in which the university as an institution is intertwined with the military-industrial complex. And so I wanted to just share a tool we have in progress hopefully it should visualize for you guys, but basically breaking down the different sources of complicit funding across the UCs. This chart is from 2005 through 2023. We group them into a variety of categories. So the largest complicit funder is federal government defense funding. That's from like the US federal government. So agencies like DARPA, like the, I forget what it stands for, like Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Anything through the Department of Defense would fall into this purple category. And then we have like private defense. So that would be like Honeywell, General Electric, Lockheed Martin, all of the like really like most vocally targeted weapons manufacturers. Then we have the green, which is like boycott targets. So things like Google, Microsoft, then like Zionist funders and Israeli companies that are based in like the occupied territories of Palestine themselves. So basically we've created this like interactive sunburst chart where you can filter by campus, by category of funder, and you can also break it down by year. There's a database below, but basically if you want to look at like who are the biggest private companies funding complicit research on University of California campuses. So like the number one would be UT Battle LLC. Let's see, the General Electric, Leidos, General Atomics. Then you can see like where it goes by campus. So the largest accepting entity by far is like the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, which is the lab where the GBU-39 was made. You can kind of break it down in this way by campus. You can go back to federal defense funding and see kind of where that ends up. A large portion ends up at UC San Diego. So I just wanted to share this as an example of kind of how we've started to map the data and research ties and how just to brainstorm and think through together ways that how do we most effectively harness like the data and the research that we have in our organizing. I like the framework before of like inform, unite, and act. Like how do we, once we've like informed and we've gathered this data, like how do we turn it into a feasible strategy to push for divestment and boycott on our own campuses? So I just kind of mapped out very roughly here, divestment. Like we all kind of agree that we want divestment, we want boycott, but what does that mean in practice? Like how do we identify which targets? I mean, when you look at $3 billion worth of funding on the UC campuses, do we call for all of it to be immediately halted? Do we target like the three most complicit private companies? That's an approach that one of the UC campuses has taken. They're calling for like a boycott of research partnerships with like the big three most complicit companies. So that's one strategy folks have tried. And then I think I have to wrap up now because my time is almost done. But I just wanted to mention narrative and media too, because I feel like on our campus especially, that's been a very important part of how we try to direct our organizing. And just to kind of touch on that, there's an enormous investment being made in sort of training folks on how to defend the occupation. Like millions of dollars are invested in like the highest paid consultants from Washington. Like this, I don't know if anyone knows Frank Luntz, but he's the guy who made global warming into climate change, like the rhetorical shift that turned like the scary thing of global warming into the neutral, harmless climate change. Like he plays with words. So like he's published a 116-page global language dictionary several years ago. I think it was 2009, but basically outlining strategies that work, frameworks that work. So there's a lot of thought going into the narrative that's used to justify the occupation, and also a lot of thought going into developing effective smear campaigns to target activists, right? So I think, at least from my like perspective at this point in time, I feel like for organizers on our campus, especially in the context of the US, like being aware of the frameworks and how they're working and how narratives and how the media is going to try to spin things to kind of paint the encampments and paint student organizers in a negative light has been a really essential part of our organizing. Also, of course, like political education, teach ends, drop the ADL campaign. The ADL is like a Zionist funded agency that does DEI trainings and things like this on campus to really promote false narratives. I don't want to, restate them here, but yeah, I just wanted to give this kind of very rough outline of how I've started to think about breaking down our organizing and like, how do we split our energy? Like if we have a small group of folks who are dedicated to working on this and we only have a little bit of time and energy, like how do we most effectively, like what do we prioritize? I don't have the right answer, but I feel like I wanted to lay it out in a framework like this so we could all kind of brainstorm as a collective of people who are working on these sorts of issues internationally. But yeah, thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Morgan, for really explaining very well the importance of the universities in supporting the genocide, both the funding they provide, the investments, as well as the research support, and also the challenges that the student movement and others face in taking on these institutions, especially the great research that people are doing to ferret out all the information that's being hidden from us. So I think we have time for a question. We have this question: how are you guys maneuvering investment and development of dual-use technologies? You want to take that, Morgan?
Yeah, dual use, like in what sense?
So these are technologies that look harmless because they have some useful use, non-militaristic use, but at the same time can be applied for militaristic purposes. For example, to use in genocide. It's a long-standing challenge for people who try to challenge technology. I don't know if it's come up in the among students but
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to have a great answer for it. I mean, like you said, I think it's a very complicated issue. The best example I can think of is AI and the way that AI specifically is being used in Gaza and how that's led to kind of the tech workers organizing kind of against the Google allowing their software or like their cloud platform to be used to store data. But I think it's a lot of these technologies have quote unquote more innocuous uses, but I think my best answer, because it's not an issue I've dealt with specifically like in organizing like locally, would be I would look to like tech workers for Palestine and how they've dealt with the issue of AI and Google's complicity. I guess for that would be where I would look for guidance to answer it. But yeah, so I don't have a better answer. But thank you.
Yeah, look to the workers. Yeah, they know better than anyone.